being with us this afternoon. We appreciate your interest. This session is entitled Fishbowl on the Challenges Facing Montana. And I don't know what that means. We'll try over the next hour to help define what a fishbowl on Montana issues might be. Today we're visiting with some community leaders from Montana Highline communities. Now you might recognize Havre and Hill County as being a Highline community on Highway 2. You might not recognize, however, that Kalispell is connected to the same highway that defines the Highline, Highway 2. So we are truly, this is a kind of a Highline panel. But despite the fact that these two communities are located on Highway 2, they are very different in some of the things that have been happening over the last several years. And we're here to acknowledge those differences and talk about them a little bit. But we're also here to identify some of the similarities and some of the challenges and opportunities that may be happening in both places. I'm really proud to say that all four of these folks were members of the Leadership Montana class of 2005, which was the very first class of Leadership Montana. So they are risk takers in addition to being community leaders. They took the leap of faith to become a part of that program early on and are now graduates and alumni. So our panel consists of Frank Garner, who's the chief of police in Kalispell. Frank is second from the left there. Steve Clawson, who's the president of the Wells Fargo Bank in Kalispell. And I will refer you to the program for their complete bios. I didn't want to take the time to read all those bios. But they're in there, and I'd encourage you to look at them. They got there's some very interesting folks. But Kalispell in Flathead County, where Steve and Frank are from, census data showed population growth during the 1990 to 2000 decade of 25.8%, compared to 12.9% for the state of Montana. In the subsequent years, from 2000 to 2003, the growth in Flathead County continued at 6.7%. And the median home price, just as another piece of data, is $125,600. It's probably actually a little higher than that now. From Havre, Hill County, we welcome Debbie Vandeberg, who is the executive director of the Havre Chamber of Commerce, and Christen Obresley, who is the compliance auditor and foundation director for Northern Montana Healthcare. Census data shows population decline in Hill County during the 1990 to 2000 decade of minus 5.6%, with a continued decline from 2000 to 2003 of minus 1.9. The median home price in Hill County is $80,500. So there's just a couple snippets of data that show you some differences in these communities. Very different pictures from two Montana Highline communities. Now, if everything goes according to plan, I probably won't get past the second question with these guys. I know how they like to talk about things, and hopefully you will engage. You don't have to wait to the end for questions. If there are things that are on your mind, please raise your hand, speak up, and let's make this a group discussion if we possibly can. But I will throw a couple of softballs out there and see if I can get the discussion going a little bit. And the first one, I want to ask Debbie and Christen, what would you say to Frank and Steve that helps them understand life in Havre and Hill County?
Well, first we need to put a disclaimer on here that Steve also was born and raised in Havre, Montana, so I'm sure that he will challenge Christen and I on some of the things that we have to say. I think that the Highline as a whole, and especially Havre, has a great tradition to our rural values. The number one industry statewide as well as in our county is agriculture. So there's an individualism and a tenacity, I guess, that we will succeed and we will do well. I think that prevails in our community. We kind of get a bad rap for the weather. I don't think that's fair. There's colder spots in Montana than Havre, and there are other communities that the wind blows harder than it does in Havre. And we're not at the end of the earth. It is a great community. We depend on agriculture, but I think the family traditions and our family values really define what our community is. We have a great willingness to participate and do things, but at the same time, I think we suffer some of the same challenges that were talked about this morning in finding the leadership to drive some things to move our community forward. We have a great willingness to jump on the wagon once the wagon's moving, but who's going to step up and make that move? The Chamber came out with a slogan a few years ago in a response to a survey that we did. And the last question on the survey was, what do you like the most about Havre? And we had about 700 of those surveys returned over a fall festival weekend. And unequivocally, it was the people. So even though we have some challenges within our community that I don't think are unique even to just Havre, we have a great population of people along the High Line.
I think if you came to Havre, you'd find that the folks there are pretty welcoming. You'd notice that we have community neighborhoods where people are watching out for each other, even though we don't have an established neighborhood watch. There's no need to, because the lady next door is probably called Grandma. And it's a place where folks take care of each other, and there's lots of opportunity to be involved if you're willing to be involved. And people support each other just with the traditional values, with the tenaciousness of making things happen. And it's a really safe place for kids.
Let me throw the same question to Frank and Steve. What would you like Deb and Christen to know about life in your community?
Well, I think first is that it's a place that I think when I was a kid growing up there was really driven by natural resources. We had the aluminum plant, the lumber companies. Those were the things that we kept our eyes on. And now we still kind of are natural resource based, but what we found out is that we've got as many people coming to us, in fact more, because of the trees that are standing as the ones that we cut down. And there's about I think there's 100 lakes within 35 miles. It's a beautiful area. Glacier Park, Flathead Lake. And we have 2 ski resorts. If you love the outdoors and mountains and beautiful vistas, we have it all. It's always been a great place not only to live, but to raise kids. And really until about 10 years ago, it was always a challenge in terms of if you wanted to stay there, if you grew up there, if you wanted to stay there, trying to find a job or trying to find a career really, and to be able to stay there was a challenge. And so many of the people that I went to school with, that I grew up there, left the area. And of course now they're starting to become the age where they're starting to want to come back and are looking for the opportunity to leave where they're at and to come back. It's a place that didn't have much growth. I think between 80 and 90, it may be between 70 and 80, but one of those decades in there, I think the town Kalispell that I live in grew by 100 people. And now we've got new apartment buildings that hold more than that are going up. And so it's a place of change. It's still a place of beauty. With that change comes a lot of opportunity though as well.
Yeah, I think about, having lived in Havre and lived in Kalispell, we actually face very similar challenges. And when you think in terms of what we want to do from a long-term standpoint, finding ways to create good paying jobs, those types of things. In Kalispell, we get blinded a little bit by what's going on up there in terms of what's going on with development and the challenges that we face, and it's very divisive up there in terms of you've got the Montana values that Debbie and Frank and Christen have talked about, and then you've got the developmental piece of what's going on in the Flathead Valley, and people are very defensive about those things, and it's very hard to get them into a room together to talk about how we plan for growth and how we do the things we need to do to keep the things that Frank's talking about, the park and the Big Mountain and Flathead Lake, and protect those. And how do we do that and still maintain the simple lifestyle and the love of the land and the safety and the things that we all live here for? And so, we are in a huge growth market in terms of real estate values. I mean, real estate values went up over 20% in the last year. In some areas, it went up dramatically more than that. And There's a different element of growth people in the Flathead Valley that are there for developmental purposes. To Frank's point, there's a lot of people there that are there who have been somewhere else. A lot of them are not Montana natives, that they've made their living or they built some wealth and now they're coming back to the Flathead Valley and they're buying property and building homes. And I think what's hard about that is, to me, those people are not what I call users of things that keep a market or a community going. You know, they're older, they're retired, they're not in my business, I'm in the banking business, they don't use credit, they don't buy car or finance vehicles, or a lot of them have their homes paid for. And so they're not like a young family that uses a lot of the services and things that we have in a community to keep it going. So I think, and being from Havre is an advantage for me because I do understand that market really well, and half my family still lives there and I get over there quite often. But I think our challenges are similar. How do we create good paying jobs that are going to keep younger people in our communities and help us keep those communities going and keep them involved in what we're trying to do from a civic standpoint as well.
There's a question.
I have a question for like everybody. I'm wondering, since there's this shift away from the natural resources industries, are the residents in your communities embracing that, the shift in industry, and also what industries are coming into prominence in your communities? I mean, I live in Missoula. I think all my friends my age work for the Forest Service, it seems like. What else are you guys doing up there?
Well, the railroad is the reason Havre's there,
Oh.
and part of the reason that Kalispell and everything along the High Line exists. Thank God Jim Hill put the railroad across northern Montana. So that's one of the reasons that we're there, and the spinoff then becomes agriculture. The railroad is in a huge growth spurt right now. The head guy at BNSF, Steve Ranke, stood up at the Chamber's annual meeting here in January and said, "I'm hiring 60 new people today. Get in line and fill out the applications." And they just can't find enough people to fill those jobs to send them away to training. Another thing that's happening in our area, I mean, we ride the roller coaster of the demand and the prices of agriculture. Cattle prices and wheat prices have been very good to us over the last few years, so that has helped Main Street a lot. The other thing is we're back in a resurgence of oil and gas exploration. We probably had 10 to 12 new businesses open up in our community in the last couple years that are all oil and gas related. In fact, our school did not have to go out for a mill levy this year because the money that came back from just the tax revenue on the oil and gas development and exploration in our area funded the school system. So Kirk Miller was very pleased not having to do that. So, and then healthcare, I mean, Christen can talk to that. Northern Montana College, it'll always be Northern Montana College. Montana State University Northern is a real driving force in our community as well, and healthcare.
Northern Montana Healthcare is the largest employer in Hill County, and we take care of the needs of the people from a five-county area as the main referral hospital. And so we add to the economic basis of the community by providing jobs and taking care of people. And if folks don't have health care available to them, then they find someplace else to live. And so that's an important factor in keeping people there and supporting other businesses.
Yeah, I think in Kalispell, some of what's going on is, those natural resource development industries are still there, and they're still an important part of the culture and our economy in that community. But I think we lived and died strictly on how they did in 20 years ago, and now we don't. And part of the reason we don't is, and I think Steve gave a real good basic outline for it, the demographics of the people that are moving there are 40 and older. They don't have kids. A lot of them don't need jobs. Kind of one of the running jokes is, what are we going to do when we're done building houses for each other? There's a tremendous amount of growth from people that have built wealth someplace else, are coming there to live now, and they're coming there for the views and the lakes and all the things that that those of us who grew up there kind of take for granted, but really love about the area. The underlying economy now, I mean, there's some other things that have come in there, like Teletech, which is a telecommunications business with about 500 jobs. There is a Semi-Tool, which I think employs in the 400 to 600 people range. Some of those soft tech, non-polluting technologies, which are nice. But there's a lot of service industry related jobs. Now we have all these large retailers and restaurants and those kinds of things which are coming in to service all these people that have come in there to retire. There's this kind of underlying economy, though, of these 30 and 40 and 50 person employers who are kind of the dot-commers, so to speak. They brought their little internet company or their little, small manufacturing or clothing company. The reason they've come there is because they can ship out of there easily. Technology allows them to be wherever they want to be, and they've chosen to be there because of the natural resources. People aren't moving into our area because we've opened up a new coal mine. They aren't moving into our area because of, some issue like that, because we have a seaport. They're moving there because they want to live there, and some of us have just discovered that's why we're there too.
Yeah, a lot of them aren't there for very long either. They're not typically all residents of Montana. They're here during the summer, and they'll come for a couple of weeks in the winter time to ski or a month, but the residency is a lot of times somewhere else. We've also experienced huge growth on the medical campus up there. I mean, if you think about, if you have an issue with your heart, besides Kalispell, the best place to be in the world is right here, Missoula, Montana. And people are looking for those types of medical facilities, and Kalispell's expanded dramatically as it relates to medical, which has been great. Those are some very good paying jobs, and we have created some very good paying jobs. But they're coming for the quality of life that Frank's talking about. And like I said, they don't use a lot of the products that I think of in terms of younger families using.
There's a couple things going on in Havre that the good and the bad of 9/11 is we sit 43 miles south of the Canadian border, and we have a pretty open border. You could probably walk across it at any point and not know you were in Canada or the United States. But because of 9/11, Homeland Security was formed, and upwards of 60 families have been moved into the Havre community because now Homeland Security has taken a different look at Homeland Security and our borders with Canada. It has been identified as there was Al-Qaeda identified north in Canada, not far from us. Unfortunately, it's kind of a drug-running area that now has really gotten national attention. The good thing about it is we have gotten some wonderful families moved into our community from the southern border, and we had a Border Patrol gentleman stand up at our same annual meeting and talk about when he got his orders. Well, he didn't get his orders. He got the option to move to Havre, Montana, and he has a very young family. And so they bought a home, and they were getting ready to go somewhere, and the neighbor came over and was looking at the house or making a comment to him, and their little girl kept saying, "But Dad, where are the bars on the windows? Where are the bars on the windows? Is our house really safe?" And I can't imagine. I mean, I've visited countries there, but they are just absolutely in love with the community. Their kids can walk to the movie theater, and they don't have to worry about anything. So the wide open spaces of Montana is truly a treasure. And we take it for granted. We take for granted the quality of life and the easiness of life that we have that other families just don't get to experience.
I was curious, as community leaders, how do you factor in civic engagement, civic involvement into solving this issue that you're talking about, that you have in your communities?
Well, I'll jump in there. We've got a project going on right now, and it's been talked about for a very long time. This is the third time I think it's come to the forefront that our community, the big BMW factory, is not going to move to Havre, Montana. So we've got to look at how we can develop small industry and small businesses and help retain and strengthen the businesses that we have. And one of the things that we see is athletics is dominant in Montana. And we do host basketball tournaments, which brings new money into our community. But unfortunately, our college gymnasium isn't large enough to satisfy the needs. And so we've looked at building an event center. And some young gentlemen that actually left our community and pursued their careers and looked back at Havre as a great place to raise their children said, we've got to do something, and we want to do something to make a difference for our town. And so they took the lead on this event center project, which then we identified after long discussions and community meetings of the best place to build this facility, which ended up on the Great Northern Fairgrounds campus, which is a fairgrounds facility that needs a lot of repair. So we decided to collaborate, and this group came together, and there's probably 35 people that sit and partake in this conversation. And they all stepped up and divided up into subcommittees. Now there's a visitor and cultural center being proposed. Well, we needed money to develop a master plan to help the fairgrounds, to help the event center. And within 1 week, one of our local bankers went out in the community and raised $15,000. Was a match that we needed to go for a community development block grant. So now the master plan is in the process. I would have to say, as the chamber director, I think that for all intents and purposes, Havre has great civic engagement. We have built $1 million hockey arena for our kids. It all came of guts and tenacity and people that pounded nails and gave of their time and labor and supplies. It's so when the project's identified, they rally around it, whether it's raising money for the Red Cross or whatever. I have a force of probably 200 volunteers through the committees of my chamber that help support the projects that we define and do in the community. So I'm very proud of what goes on in our community.
One of the things that I think that we do in Havre too to promote civic engagement is that we involve the youth in what's going on. Debbie runs a leadership high school program that introduces kids to civic engagement. The government teacher has a requirement that they attend a city council meeting so they can understand the workings of that. We're a strong 4-H community. Kids learn about volunteerism early on. So all of those kinds of opportunities to get kids involved in and engaged civically are important to us. Our mayor has an open door and listens to kids when they come in with ideas about what they think we should do with our city and our community. And so
Our seniors are very involved.
right.
I'd like to probe something that came up earlier. Steve was talking about some of the controversy and the difficulty of getting everybody on the same page regarding the growth that's happening with Flathead. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because you have a group of people that argue very, very hard for planning, but they're the same group of people that argue very, very hard for individual rights. And it's a constant conflict. And the conflict I see up there, or I feel like it's a fair, depending on which group you're talking about, I feel like it's a fairly small group. They're very well organized. They're very vocal. They understand how to write letters to the editor and how to market their position to the community, but I'm not sure that they necessarily represent what's in the best interest of the community over the long haul. And the challenge is, how do you get all of those groups in one room and move them forward in one direction that's going to take us to where we want to be? I really think our biggest challenge has been and will continue to be that we've got a lot of apathy in our public. A lot of people that they have a feeling one way or another, but they're not involved. And it's hard to get them to the table to get them involved.
Or it's afraid if they take an involvement, how it's going to affect their business.
Yeah, I mean, how do you get them? We're always looking for, okay, what's the axe that this group wants to grind, and versus let's get in the same room and try to move this thing forward. It's very frustrating. One of our challenges, Bruce, has been we really didn't have any planning. We don't have a growth plan in place. We're trying to get a growth plan in place, but we're so far behind the curve as it relates to what we need to do with infrastructure based on what's happened in the last 5 years that we can't seem to catch up. And we can't seem to push the rope hard enough to get it to where we need to be, to where we can kind of try to get on the front end of what's going on. And we've got lots of groups who have an interest in And I'll give you one example. Last week, there's quite a bit of agriculture up in the Flathead Valley, which most people don't know. We have a guy up there that owns quite a bit of property. The individual came to him, wants to develop the property. Started at $20,000 an acre. That's a lot of money. $20,000. Guy said, no, it's a family farm. I don't want to sell it. I really want to keep it in the family. Last week, they were up to $35,000 an acre. And this guy is saying, what should I do? What do I do for that kind of money? At some point, you know, what am I doing? I'm really not running a farm here. I'm managing an asset is what I'm doing. I'm not farming anymore. I'm taking care of an asset that somebody wants. There are groups of people up there that think agriculture will just totally be gone in the Flathead Valley in the next 10 to 11 years, maybe faster, for that very reason. And it's happening so fast, we can't seem to get things in place for, I mean, roads and infrastructure things. How do we move people around? And already there's some areas where it's dangerous to drive a car. Frank, you know.
I'm working on it, though.
I mean, maybe you want to talk about that issue some.
Well, I think those are all good points. What strikes me about this, and first, the reason they usually bring me to those is because my motto is you get more with a smile and a gun than just a smile. And so sometimes that helps. But, you know, I think the difference is, and the reason that you're seeing the difference between the two is, and you got to be careful what you wish for, because I was a kid that grew up there, always wanted growth and opportunity for a career. You know, now we've got it, now we wish we didn't have it, and, you know, or not as much as we do. And I think you see between what Debbie was talking about, what we're talking about, is the difference between where we were 20 years ago. And we had, I think, then more civic engagement because we felt we needed it. And we have less now because we're so busy, there's so much growth, there's so much going on, we're so busy in our lives, and there's maybe not this impending sense that we need it. Not to say that our community hasn't stepped up to the plate. I think they've, you know, approved about $75 million in bond measures, a new high school, new junior high, new middle school, this all within the last year, a new fire station, a new pool, an expansion to the community college. You know, it's staggering to me when, you know, I think of the dollars. But when I'm talking about just people being involved, I think the reason that it's you know, working well and has worked well for us in the past is because it was the same personalities. Now you've got this clash of cultures and values. You know, a lot of these, the new folks that are moving in don't have the same sense of values and the same culture as the folks that have been there. And now everybody that was hoping for the growth is, you know, wants it exactly where they want it and when they want it. And, you know, I think that clash between those two is kind of what's retarded our growth a little bit. The problem is the growth is happening and we don't have our act together, you know, in advance quick enough to deal with it. It's still going on, and we don't have the infrastructure in place, you know, and the planning pieces in place, you know, quick enough and well enough to deal with the growth. And I think that's what's interesting about, you know, the difference between the two is because I hear from Debbie just exactly where we were, you know, 20 years ago. Now I don't even know where we are sometimes. You know, my business is a growth industry. Mm-hmm. You know, I've been with the department 21 years. You know, we had one murder the first 8 years I was there. We've had 8 in the last 5 years. And of course, methamphetamine, you know, is a big problem there like it is. I mean, we see, you know, we handled about 10 years ago about 12,000 calls a year for service. We handle about 21,000 last year. So, you know, the old saying about with the dog comes the fleas, you know, when you think about all these exciting growth issues, sometimes you forget about, you know, all the responsibilities and issues that come along with it.
Talk about the infrastructure again. You mentioned that. Do you have enough cops to keep up with the growth? Do you have enough firefighters?
Well, I think here's one thing that's changed. This is last year that should make a big difference, and that is impact fees. You know, for us, that's a big deal, and I think that's been one of the clashes between Eastern and Western. That and let's say, you know, the sales tax has always been kind of a big issue now. You know, where we have 1 million visitors a year, for us it's
a resort tax.
Yeah, a resort tax. Whitefish, for instance, we don't have one in Kalispell, but has done great things with their infrastructure from that. But, for instance, the people in Billings really are opposed to that because a lot of people outside Billings come into it and shop and don't want to, pay an extra tax for the privilege of coming into Billings and having to shop. So, I mean, there's kind of that clash between that East and West culture, and what happens for me in my job is it's a year before we start collecting the taxes when we get a new big subdivision or we annex a new area, and then it takes you about a year to get the people on and get them trained. So you're always 2 years behind the curve, and that curve has been going now for about 7, 8 years, and in my business, you definitely don't want to be caught, behind the curve, and so for us, that's a concern. But streets, highways up in our area, that's a huge. We don't have the road infrastructure to carry the number of people, and so we have a lot of issues that are created because of that. That we're trying to play catch up on. So.
Well, there's quite a number of people that are buying the land. They've got a 5 or 10 year time horizon. So what they're doing is they're buying the property, buying the land now with no intention really of building initially, but they've got a 5-10 year window when they come up and build at that point, but they want to get the land tied up. So we've got all these subdivisions going on, and you look at all the number of housing permits or building subdivision permits that are going up, and you think, where are all these people coming from? Well, they're coming, but they're not coming next year. They're coming pretty consistently over the next 15 years. And the population numbers that they've got out there for what's going to happen up there, I think, are a little conservative as to what's probably really going to happen. We forget that, even what we think are outlandish land and home prices are a drop in the bucket to somebody from California or from Texas and places like that. They can come up here, they can sell they can sell a 1,200 square foot home for $1 million in California and put half of that in the bank and build you can imagine a $500,000 home in Kalispell or Missoula or anywhere else in the state, and have 7 or 8 times the type of home that they had in California. So those things happen every day.
I was just wondering, with all the growth, I'm from Helen, and we're kind of going through that too, not like you guys, but how do you address affordable housing for young families? You look at the prices all over really western Montana, and I think, I'm lucky enough to have a home, but I look at these young folks coming out of college and that, and, how do they even get a place?
Well, one of the things that's happening in the industry that's going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years is that the kids you're talking about don't want what we have. They want what they're calling it clustered housing, actually, where it's very close together. Lots of amenities within walking distance, almost planned communities. They don't have a whole lot of, they're not looking for 20 or 30 acres, but they're looking to be in a small little community type of a development. They being people in the housing industry, think that that's an opportunity to provide some housing that's going to be a little more reasonable. Whitefish has actually done a better job than Kalispell, in my opinion, and provided some affordable housing up there. And what they call affordable housing and what you and I would call affordable housing is a little different, but they have done a better job. And that's a challenge I think we have to meet in the Flathead, is we have to find some ways to provide that.
Yeah, and that medium home price is $159,000 now, and a lot of those service industry jobs I was talking about, are paying $8 an hour, and here are people that are making $8 an hour trying to go out and figure out how to buy a home. The first big home I bought, or what I call a real home, it was $70,000, and I didn't know how I'd ever afford it, and I was looking at $80,000, and I told Debbie, I said, that's a down payment. Now it's incredible, and it's going up, 20% a year.
And one of the other things that our communities looked at is the aging population that we have. They've got older people moving into their communities in the retirement mode, but a lot of our population has been there from the beginning, and because they love it there, because they can choose to be there. But they're getting older, and so they don't want the houses that we were raised in, or that a lot of us are buying in our lives. They want that condominium type of thing where they don't have to worry about mowing their lawn, and they can throw their golf clubs in the back of their car, and they can take off to go watch a Bobcat Grizzly game and golf and not have to worry about anything. And these are the people that are at my age, in their 50s, that are saying, I want to change my lifestyle. I'm tired of mowing my lawns. I still want to work, but I just don't want all the extra strings attached. And so there's a group of local developers that have just purchased a bunch of land, and they know for sure that probably 6 of those apartment / condominium / townhouse type of development are going to be, I mean, they got a waiting list already. It's like, when are they going to break ground on that development? Because they just don't want the big houses anymore. So there's a synergy going on in our community that we can't even get our arms around right now. You can't find an empty office space in downtown Havre right now. There's the good and the bad of Walmart announcing to come to your community. First runs this fear of God through every Main Street retailer. But it's also given us that little puff that we needed to kind of throw back our shoulders and say, the #1 retailer in the world is looking at putting a store in Havre, Montana. And you go, that's a good thing. Because even though it's bad, but it kind of gives everybody that vote of confidence that, okay, we aren't at the end of the roadmap, that there is some good things about living in rural America and rural Montana. And we, prior to the Walmart announcement, we have a great partnership, I feel we do, with the Chamber and the city and the county and our Bear Paw Development Group, where we meet regularly. We work on projects and we share stuff, and we've gone through some not real in-depth strategic planning. We need a growth plan, but we've looked at developing tax increment districts and how can we better help our business people in our community as this growth starts to happen. We're looking at extending our city limits and getting those people involved in, they're using the city services, so how do we get them involved? Because all of our growth is happening on the county. It's just happening over the hill where it becomes the county line right now. And so there's those things that are looked at. We just completed a resource assessment where we brought in people from across the state of Montana that are experts in economic development and whatever, and did town hall meetings and community meetings, and basically asked the communities in different sections, from the police to the bankers to the healthcare people to Main Street business, what's wrong with our community, what are our challenges, and what are our opportunities. And the best thing was they were very candid about everything, which gave us some marching orders to work on. And as much as I love the western side and I love going to Kalispell and Whitefish, I really like where we're at right now, because we can learn from their mistakes as we watch them and Missoula and Helena even now go through some of those growth spurts. We'll never be that size, and I don't know if I ever want Havre to be that size. We're pretty constant. When I was growing up there in the boom in the 50s, we were about a town of 12 to 14,000. We're stabilized at about 10. I mean, perfectly would be like 12 maybe. But as long as we have affordable housing, some good paying jobs and reasons for people to stay there, I think it'll be a happy place to live.
Notice Steve's smile as she was saying, he's reflecting back on his youth.
Well, yeah, you know, I moved from Havre to Gillette, Wyoming. So if you've ever been to Gillette, Wyoming, you want a place that's, you know, fairly desolate. But when I went from Gillette, I went to Bozeman, Montana before I went to Kalispell, and somebody said to me one time, wow, you're going to Bozeman from Gillette? That's fantastic. And I'm like, well, yeah, but you know, I do what I did in Gillette every day. The view out the windshield of my car's a little different, but I go to work, I get the kids to school, I go to the dentist, I mow the lawn. You know, maybe I have the opportunity to ski or fish, but I don't do that every day. I didn't do it in Gillette, and I didn't do it in Havre, and I don't do it in Kalispell. I have a little more opportunity to ski, but I don't know that I ski anymore than somebody that doesn't live in the Flathead. The day in and day out living part of it is the same whether you're in Kalispell or Gillette, but.
Or Havre.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Is there an opportunity for a community like Havre, from the growth in areas like Kalispell or Bozeman or others, where people want to get back to that type of community that they grew up in? And
well, I can speak to my board of directors of 16 3 years ago, and actually it's the same group that's leading this charge on our event center right now, and the tax increment district concept is They all went to Missoula or Bozeman. They all got great degrees. One of them worked for Wells Fargo in Minneapolis. One of them is a chemical engineer and worked for a large company in Florida. Great professions where they were making, big dollars in our comparison. And got married, started to talk about having a family, and suddenly looked back and went, that little town that we could hardly wait to get out of is looking pretty good right now. And so we talk about the leakage that we lose to our youth going away, but I was born and raised in Havre and left lived in New York City before I moved back. And I think you have to get out and you have to see what's going on around you, and you have to watch that constantly in order to be a good citizen to your community. And so you come back and say, I want to make a difference. You have the ability to make a difference in those communities when you come back. So the good and the bad of our kids leaving is that they get a great education, but then they get an opportunity to come back and get involved in our communities. And I think it's wonderful.
I think it is too, because those kids that have left and come back have gained the experiences of other areas, and they're willing to share those with folks who are planning.
And the word no, it doesn't work, doesn't fit in their vocabulary.
Yeah.
John, you have a question?
Debbie, you talked about wanting to go back to Havre for that sense of being able to make a difference. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk, and all the other panelists also speak about what are some of the opportunities in your communities for people to feel like they can make a difference?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, first of all, you can get involved in the Chamber of Commerce. I have 13 committees, and we're always looking for people to make a difference. And it's a gamut. It's from promoting tourism to economic development to my leadership high school program. You can volunteer. I mean, we got service clubs in our communities that are doing wonderful things. We have an awesome Boys and Girls Club right now that has probably over 1,000 kids that belong to it. They took a school in our downsizing of our elementaries. We closed elementary school, but we turned that negative into a positive, and the Boys and Girls Club came into town, and over 1,000 kids are enrolled in that. And there's a whole host of volunteer opportunities. The kids are learning to cook and iron and use a sewing machine and all that wonderful stuff. There's the retired Corps of Senior Volunteers is very active. So when people say to me there's, first of all, nothing to do in Havre, they get like a 15-minute lecture from me of all the things there is to do. We have a wonderful group of people, Montana Actors Theater, that is developing and presenting wonderful cultural things. There's a community band. I mean, there's a whole host of things that people can do to get involved in their community. And I think rather than somebody just sitting and listing off all that stuff, that they look into it and read about it and attend those meetings and see where they fit. Not every committee is going to be the perfect fit for you, but there should be some task or project going on in the community where you've got some expertise that you could bring to the table, and we'd love that to happen.
Kirsten,
Deb's covered it quite
okay.
well.
Well, I'm a big believer in the mentorship programs, and particularly from what I've done for the last 21 years, I can tell you that I'm like Big Brothers and Sisters programs, those kinds of things. Teaching them how to fish as opposed to giving them one. I think any of those kind of programs are the kind of things that make a difference in outcomes, in people's lives. We have about 300, teenagers that are basically out there on their own, trying to, it's hard enough when everything's in the right order. And when you're out there trying to do it, on your own, it's pretty tough. So, if somebody came up to ask me, I said, become a big brother and sister, or go, volunteer down at the Boys and Girls Club, or, become a teen mentor, or do something in somebody's life, that's going to change an outcome for them.
I'm really interested with your different roles that you all play in your communities. How does national service fit in addressing your challenges? I want to ask how it's valued by your communities, how important it is, but I'm not sure if that's a really fair way to ask it. So, does national service fit in the realm of ammunition you have in your communities to address some of these challenges?
And by national service.
National service programs, AmeriCorps programs, VISTA programs, retired and senior volunteer programs. I'm selfishly asking because I'm involved in the program, but I'm wondering, because I very rarely get to communicate with people not already affiliated with us. So
Yeah,
I'd be really interested in perspectives.
I'll give you a couple for instances. As the past president of the of the Big Brothers and Sisters organization, so I got to, pump them up a little bit. They had an AmeriCorps volunteer who started what's called the Lunch Pail Pal program. Many of you may be familiar with that, which is one of those that provides an opportunity for people. It's a little less of a commitment than the full, commitment that a lot of people can make, and so it allowed a lot more people to be able to volunteer. And that one AmeriCorps volunteer, I think, got 60 or 70, people the first year to volunteer for this lunch pail. I mean, that's the kind of, potentiation effect that, I look for from national programs that, again, have the chance to change outcomes, for people long term.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond to that for Heather.
Well, we have an AmeriCorps program through Montana State University Northern, and to be really honest, I made a note to myself to go back and check. Their lead person made a contact with the chamber a couple years ago, and I provided some community stuff, and we have become disconnected. And so to be really honest, that it probably isn't one of the resources that I probably should be using, and I made a note to myself to go back and double check that. I know that the RSVP program through the seniors is vital. I mean, we use them a lot for different things. They're very good in my leadership high school program, and so we do use.
Yeah.
Here in Missoula, homelessness is one of our major issues, the disparity between wages and the cost of homes. And I'm wondering, in your communities, I don't know if it's the same situation there where you can have two wage earners, working two jobs each and still not be able to afford a home. And we have so many families who are homeless. And if that rings true in your communities, and what your communities are doing to address homelessness.
Yeah, I can touch on it a little bit just from, my role within the city as our economic development organization within the city has done a really good job of, helping build both affordable housing and working on some programs really in partnership with members of the community who are running, what amount to essentially homeless shelters. But they're a little more than that. They're really the ability, it's kind of a hand up instead of a handout. They really have some specific guidelines set for the people that come in there about the time they can be in there, and their ability to look for work and all those things. We have some people who are homeless because they choose to be. I mean, we try to help them, and they really, we can't have an impact. They don't want to be anything other than that. But that's not most of the people that we deal with. And so, most of them are looking for transitional housing, to try to get themselves into, some kind of more permanent program. There's a great program down in Summers, which is just south of Kalispell, where the people are putting sweat equity into the homes. They're basically this group of people. It's a little village, and they're building this whole set of homes together, and nobody gets to live in the house until everybody's home is done. And I think that's a really neat concept that they're using.
Our local HRDC unit, our Human Resource and Development Council, worked very closely with the abandonment of the old radar base that was north of Havre, and purchased several homes that were brought into Havre as transitional homes to help people learn how to be a homeowner and so on and so forth. And as they developed in that process, then they were allowed, you could only be in there for a while, and then you needed to move on. There are some apartment housing complexes that are lower income type of places. Food-wise, we see a lot of people come through our community on the train. Not so much in the winter because of the cold, but in the summertime we see a lot of people sitting on our street corners and we have a program through the Salvation Army called Feed My Sheep, and it's pretty breathtaking when you go there and volunteer for an afternoon and see how many people that's their only hot meal for the day. And it's that side of your community that it's always heart-wrenching to see that it goes on, because we all kind of think that we're all doing the best to the best of our ability to make sure that doesn't happen. But unfortunately, there are those that fall through the cracks.
One of the advantages of living in an aging community is that as people age and they leave their homes and move into retirement facilities or nursing homes or move out of the community, it provides a base for our young families to get into houses and things that they can afford to do. And Bear Paw Development and our District 4 HRDC do a really good job with the first-time homebuyers programs and getting people lined up in homebuyer education and teaching them how to establish and maintain households.
You mentioned MSU Northern a bit ago, and I work for an organization that tries to work with higher education and having higher education go into the community to help meet community needs. So I'm wondering what roles higher education, Flathead Valley Community College, MSU Northern plays in helping meet the needs of the issues in your community.
Well, our business department is very strong at Northern, and so they are great partners with us at the Chamber because we are an organization of businesses. And so they work with us on different projects within the community. Our teacher education program at Northern is very good. In fact, probably if you polled all the teachers along the High Line, they're probably all graduates of Montana State University Northern's program in some fashion.
The nursing program.
The nursing program is a huge huge component in our community. I think the CEO walks across the street and could hire every one of the nurses that graduates out of Northern every year.
Yeah.
I think education's the key to almost all of this. We've got to make it easier for people to get in there and access it. People that don't have the financial wherewithal necessarily to get in and access it, we've got to do that. We've got to find ways to provide on-demand learning in different ways to be successful. You know, this future is all about rapid change, and you've got to be able to learn on the fly. I mean, one guy said last week that 20% of what I learned last year is outdated. So in 5 years, I'm really going to be stupid.
One of the things that
But we
that our-
can't keep up with it, and
Yeah.
if we don't get more access in there, we're not going to be able to help these people, because we're going to have a lot of people that are in a position now that are my age that are not going to be able to continue in that career. They're going to have to find a different path.
One of the things that our business community has noticed is, and the enrollment at Northern is, we're kind of a trade school. I mean, teachers, you know, nurses, professional people, and our diesel technology area is second to none. The kids that walk out of there go to work for Caterpillar, and they've got great paying jobs. But one of the things that we noticed was that we were outsourcing a lot of our students to learn the trades, and there's a resurgence back to the trades. And so one of our local plumbers went to task with the Board of Regents and the Plumbers Union, and basically has taken and developed the Wahpeton program out of Wahpeton, North Dakota, that's going on at Montana State University Northern. So we have plumbers right now that are learning that trade in our community, and our community is suffering greatly. I mean, unfortunately, hope you don't have a big plumbing issue because they're all busy. The next one that's on the docket is an electricians program, and Terry Shanda, local electrician, is working very hard to put that one in place. And right behind it is apprentice contractors trade thing. So they're trying to meet the demands of our community, and we've got a growth thing going on right now too, and it's back to that synergy thing that I can't quite put my finger on. So I think the college and the business community are really working hand in hand to make that stuff accessible.
I have to say, as a person who graduated from Flathead Valley Community College, I'd better get this in or they won't have me back in, but I think they've done maybe a better job than anyone in the state in addressing the needs of some of the local businesses and industry. Some of the reasons some of those places came there, that they expanded there, was because of the opportunities offered through the college, and they've done a great job of partnershiping with some of the, Semi-Tool and some of those others in the area of providing training.
I'm with Senior Corps, and I like to know what kind of philosophy discussion and pro-planning that your communities are doing on public transportation. I have a senior companion program in a lot of rural communities, plus large community like Helen and Great Falls, but you know, we all know of people driving that shouldn't be driving. And, you know, you start back to your philosophy of Haver, you know, of independence and tenacity. And certainly that is a tribute to us Montanans. But we're in dire straits of needing public transportation in our communities. Helena doesn't even have a good public transportation system. So I'm just wondering, you know, what you guys are doing to be proactive in your community regarding this issue.
Well, we have Eagle Transit, which is out of Human Resources in Kalispell, but it's
The HRDC.
right. It's got
We have that too.
yeah, but it's pretty specific to you know a certain clientele. Really, it's not just pick you up on the corner and drive you around. So really, we don't have.
Beyond that, we don't. We are not.
Have you started? Do you have committees or started discussing on how to develop a citywide transportation system or?
No.
Go, Christen.
No, we really haven't.
Okay.
In Haver, we have the senior citizens bus that picks people up and takes them where they need to go. We have a taxi cab that can barely can exist. It's one of my pet projects because whenever you start looking at community health centers and trying to get people to healthcare and trying to then get them, if their healthcare centers downtown, how do you get them from there up to their ancillary services? How do you figure it out? It is a tough subject to try and figure out and to make it work. One of the best examples, and I don't even remember the community that was talking about it, was one year at the Governor's Conference on Aging. They talked about how the senior centers went into a collaboration with the school district, and the seniors would get on the bus with the kids in the morning and ride to the local senior center. And then the school bus would pick them up and take them back into their day to get their rural seniors into their communities. But we have to start using innovative thinking in order to solve the transportation issues, because that's the very thing. We have senior citizens who are looking out for other senior citizens and giving people rides who shouldn't probably perhaps be driving in the first place. I had a personal experience last week. I was visiting one of our outreach senior citizen centers, and I parked my car on the street, and one of the ladies honked her horn in her pickup and backed out and hit my car and drove off. So we really need to do something about the transportation needs.
Good question. Huh?
Yeah, as an example of one of these little hybrids is that Galavan, which is the HRDC transportation program for seniors in the Gallatin Valley, is discussing with the university, which has a transportation system, of finding a way to combine. So again, you're instead of having two separate organizations that are barely able to stay alive, we're looking at increasing the pool of people they can serve and providing resources. So that's an example. But I did have a question: is if you guys could comment, we've talked about some of the wonderful opportunities to volunteer in your communities with different, all kinds of different programs that you mentioned. And you talked about some of the challenges of in your community, growth and housing and jobs and things like that. But if you could comment on perhaps what is all those things, jobs, houses, don't create community, or at least not a civically engaged community. I was wondering if you could speak maybe about the role of the private sector or also the public sector in helping build that synergy that you talked about in your community. And that civic engagement in your community.
Well, and I'll go back to the work that we do at the Chamber. We just don't do programs. I mean, we're basically an organization of businesses, and so our mission is to make our business community vital and stimulate activity there, but the continuation of our mission statement is to make our community strong and vital. And so a lot of the programs that we are involved in are not just focused on business. They're focused on the community, where we go out and get people involved in a project. I think our mayor right now is probably a flagship testimonial to this. We've talked about a walking path for a very long time in our community, and he's jumped on board and garnered the efforts of our local runners group and the local Lions Club and a bunch of them, and they've gone out and they've started to build a walking trail. The chamber took 8 city blocks that is owned by our local Wells Fargo that had been abandoned since the mid-'70s, when a terrible fire destroyed that half of the block. And it was this haphazard parking lot in downtown Havre, and it was just ugly. I mean, it was just wretched looking as you drive through Havre on Highway 2. And so a group of my board members, with some ideas from some of us that had worked on that earlier, decided to wrap their arms around that project. And we worked very closely with Wells Fargo Bank to negotiate a lease on that land. We ended up having to swap another lot out to finish the project. Bear Paw Credit Union stepped up. I mean, we got businesses and volunteers. To the day the sod truck came in, I can't tell you where all the people came to empty 3 semi-loads of sod to go down in this park. And so it always, I mean, it's usually the project. You're not going to get everybody down there on a project, but it's being able to identify projects and tasks in the community where you can go and zero in on groups who then you bring that individual in who has a feeder group that say, hey, I'm really involved in this project. Come with me. It's doing a good thing. So.
Yeah, I think this is actually a really important question, and it's a huge centerpiece of what we call community policing. And I tell people all the time, I say, do you ever wonder why, like in Kalispell, 33 policemen can police 20,000 people? Why we don't have Humvees with, machine guns sitting on them on the street corners and tanks running down our road? And if they ever figure out they've got us outnumbered that bad, we're in really big trouble. But the reason is because the community allows us. We're not an occupying army. We're a local police department. And the engagement of a community, it's called social equity, the ability of a community to muster its resources towards any one particular or a multiple number of problems, is the difference between whether you've got a community or you don't. I think if I had to guess, and I'm not from there, but if I had to guess from parts of the South that suffered greatly from not just the hurricane, but from the aftermath of it, is because you had a generation of people that were sitting there waiting for somebody else to help them. And one of the things in community policing, say, hey, we're there, don't take this as an excuse not to do our job, but with you, we can do so much better. It's not only less expensive, we'll be more effective. You don't have to reach for your checkbook every time you need to do something. Being involved, being interested in your own self-protection is one of the most important things you can do to making this a healthier, safer community. Not just paying your taxes and sitting at home and kind of shrugging your shoulders at the 6 o'clock news, but being involved is a super important issue from a safety standpoint.
And I have a public safety question. I highly value the ability to walk down a street day or night and not have to worry about it. And that's a very fragile bit of community policing. And I think methamphetamine has impacted communities in Montana in a very big way and in a very dark way. In Helena, we had a librarian shot by someone who'd been on, or murdered by someone who'd been on meth. And it's one of those where it shakes that foundation of a safe community. And you talked about it for Havre. You've mentioned it for Kalispell. How do you get that community involved in keeping it a safe place to live, to walk, to grow your family or whatever?
Well, we've done a lot of awareness in Havre, and there's been several meth forums, and the people that turned out, it was completely amazing.
Over 500.
The first meth forum, when people turned out just to learn about meth and what it is and how it affects our community and what we need to do to be aware of to make sure that it doesn't happen. And the second meth forum was being planned and coming up, and one of the boards that I sit on is a CASA board, and some of the membership of the board said, hey, you know, there's going to be a lot of people there for the meth forum. Let's put up a table out front and promote what we're doing with CASA. And it's just that piggybacking and the partnershiping and realizing that there's other things going on and we can be part of it, that makes us a good place to be and to take advantage of it. But meth is a real issue. We're, and Debbie may be able to speak to this a little better than I can, but we're part of a tri-agency drug task force area, and they're really active. The folks know about it, and they're doing a good job. And part of it is, too, that our eyes are wide open. We know that there's potential for a real problem and that we need to get a handle on it before it takes us over.
Yeah, it's changed my job more than any one thing over the course of my career, period. Meth has. You know, it is intertwined into, you know, all the things that we do. I mean, from thefts and, you know, forgeries, domestic abuse, the murders, the sexual assaults. I mean, it has had a dramatic impact. But, you know, I think that New York City, of all the places in the world, taught us an important lesson. That important lesson was this. They went from, you know, they never had time for these basic community value things. You know, they were too busy with the robberies and the rapes and the murders. And one of the things they figured out was that the people that were committing those crimes later were the ones they were dealing with on, you know, basic community value issues like vagrancies and, you know, open containers of alcohol and that kind of thing. So they went back to enforcing basic community values, and they saw the sharpest decrease in modern times in violent crime. It really is a matter of enforcing community values, you know, and that can't be done by 33 people. You know, it's got to be done by the community at large, and when the community does that, then the community benefits from it.
We have a program, and it's not unique. I think Kalispell still has it, that if kids get in trouble with minor offenses, whether it's an MIP or curfew or whatever, that they work with, they have to put in community service hours. And the good thing about that is they get to spend time with community leaders going out doing community service projects. And 9 times out of 10, at the end of their tour, should you will, when they've got their time in, they've asked Mayor Bob or whoever they worked with, could we come back and do this next weekend, because we really like the project that you put us on and we see value in it for our community. And so taking something that was negative and turning it into a learning experience for them has been valuable. So taking those types of things, I belong to our Healthy Community, Healthy Youth Action Forum, where we ask adults to assess other adults on have they done something positive for a child or a youth that day. And the nominations we get out of our community are just, would bring tears to your eyes, that there are really wonderful people doing wonderful things in our community. And one of those is watching Sammy walk down the street, and if he threw a rock at Mrs. Smith's window, Kristen's going to know about it before she gets out of work, because the neighbor next door is going to call her and say, you know what your kid just did? Before the police station even knows. And so it goes back to that, a community, raising a community taking care of our community, and all of us working together to make that happen.
One of the things I've not heard any of you talk about very much is young children. I have a foster grandparent program, which is in Kalispell. And we frequently find out when we have grandparents in schools, one of the things administrators tell us is that they notice a marked increase of respect from the children to their peers, to older people, to their teachers, to their parents. That program engenders, just because it's such a close one-on-one mentoring thing. But there are a lot of holes, and there are a lot of things that are not happening in elementary schools, and isn't that really where we catch the behaviors that turn into violence and turn into really dangerous stuff later? So what are your communities doing about that?
Well, the Boys and Girls Club's been a tremendous asset to our community. It's a place where kids can go after school. It's a safe place. They're learning skills that are necessary. They're having community with other children, with other adults. Being a big agriculture community, 4-H instills some really great values. We have a strong church system. We have the kids volunteering. I had a whole list of things that we had kids involved in that was made it a good place for kids to be. Youth soccer, youth basketball, all of those activities that just bring people together, and they begin to know the other people's children, and it promotes a certain amount of accountability.
Yeah, and I would say that, I think grade school sometimes is almost too late. And I'm part of a program that's called, it's a national program, Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, where we actually lobby for money to go to programs, like that helps with preschool needs or daycare needs, those kind of things that help to programs like the Nurturing Center, which you're probably familiar with in Kalispell, that help, people learn how to be parents and how to take care of kids. And, I think the earlier we get them, the better, because I can tell you the grade school teachers can tell me who I'm going to be dealing with, 10 years down the road, and they're generally right. And, I think that, really early stages, and, I was joking with Steve because we used to be neighbors, and his daughter is a friend of my son's, and I say I'm the father of 3 kids too, for sure. I have to make sure my wife's not here when I say that, but because I've got a girl getting straight A's, and there's just no way that she can be mine. But I think it starts at home. Making sure your kids grow up to be good citizens. But I think it's that you talked about it. The mentorship, younger the better. Do me a favor, I'll find other work.
We're supposed to wrap up at 2:30, and we really appreciate your involvement today. And I particularly want to thank the panelists because they all traveled from Kalispell and Havre to be here with us today, and I'd like to thank them for that. And I would like to conclude with one final question to each of you, and that is, what are you most proud of about your community?
The people.
Yeah, I would say the people. I'd have to agree with that. Yep, definitely.
I probably should say the police department, but I'll say the people.
Well, I'm going to say the school system and the hospital system in our community, and which is, of course, made up of people.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. You're great participants, and we hope you enjoyed it. Have a good rest of the afternoon.